It's Christmas Eve, 1818. A small church in Austria. The organ is broken. Father Joseph Moore hands his friend Franz Gruber a poem he wrote just hours earlier. By midnight, they've composed a simple melody on guitar. That song, Silent Night, would become the most recorded Christmas song in history, translated into 300 languages. But how did we get from ancient monks chanting in Latin to Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You dominating the charts every December? The story is more fascinating than you might think. Welcome to Logic Over Spirit. Christmas music is everywhere this time of year. Shopping malls, radio stations, streaming playlists. It's impossible to escape. But have you ever stopped to consider how strange this phenomenon really is? We live in an increasingly secular age, yet millions of people, regardless of their beliefs, find themselves humming along to songs about divine births, angels, and religious miracles. Christmas music has transcended its sacred origins to become something both deeply spiritual and profoundly commercial. Today, we're tracing an extraordinary journey that spans nearly 2,000 years. We'll explore how Christmas music evolved from solemn Gregorian chants, echoing through medieval monasteries, to the pop anthems that define our modern holiday season. Along the way, we'll examine the religious transformations, philosophical shifts, and cultural revolutions that shape the music we now take for granted. This is a story about faith, commerce, tradition, and rebellion. It's about how a single holiday soundtrack reflects humanity's changing relationship with the sacred and the secular. Chapter 1: Sacred Origins. The story of Christmas music begins, not with celebration, but with contemplation. In the early centuries of Christianity, there was no Christmas music as we understand it today. The birth of Jesus wasn't even widely celebrated as a distinct holiday until the 4th century, when the Church established December 25th as the official date of commemoration. Before that, Easter, the resurrection, was Christianity's paramount festival. Birth was secondary to redemption. When Christmas did emerge as a liturgical celebration, the music that accompanied it was austere, meditative, and entirely functional. The Gregorian chants that filled the cold stone spaces of medieval churches were not designed to entertain. They existed for a single purpose: to facilitate worship, to create a sonic environment where the human voice could serve as a bridge between earth and heaven. As the medieval philosopher Boethius wrote, music is so naturally united with us that we cannot be free from it, even if we so desire. For early Christian theologians, this unity made music a dangerous and powerful tool. It could elevate the soul toward God, or lead it astray toward earthly pleasures. Gregorian chant, named after Pope Gregory I, who standardized its use around 600 CE, represented the Church's attempt to purify music of its sensual qualities. These chants were monophonic, meaning they consisted of a single melodic line without harmony or accompaniment. There was no rhythm in the modern sense, no predictable beat to make you tap your foot. The melodies flowed like waves, following the natural cadence of Latin prayer. Monks would spend hours each day singing these chants, their voices blending into a unified expression of devotion. The philosophy behind this approach was deeply rooted in Platonist thinking, which had been absorbed into Christian theology through figures like Augustine of Hippo. Augustine struggled with music throughout his life. In his Confessions, he admitted that he sometimes found himself more moved by the singing than by the thing that was sung. A distraction he considered sinful. Music's power to stir emotions was both its spiritual potential and its moral danger. The solution was to strip music down to its essence, to make it a vehicle for sacred text rather than an independent source of pleasure. Christmas chants like Pura Natus, Est Nobis, Unto Us a Child is Born, exemplified this aesthetic. The Latin text from Isaiah proclaimed the theological significance of Christ's incarnation. The melodies served only to carry these words, to give them wings without overshadowing their meaning. There was nothing in these chants that would appeal to popular taste, no catchy hook or memorable tune. They were not meant to be sung by common people at all, but by trained clergy who had devoted their lives to liturgical practice. This exclusivity reflected a broader religious philosophy. Medieval Christianity operated on the principle of mediation. Ordinary believers did not have direct access to Scripture, which was written in Latin, a language most couldn't read. They did not take communion in both bread and wine. The wine was reserved for priests, and they did not participate in the musical life of the church beyond listening. Religion was something performed for them by specialists, by those who had been sanctified through ordination and training. But even in this rigidly controlled environment, something interesting began to happen. By the 9th and 10th centuries, monks started adding additional melodic lines to existing chants, creating what we now call polyphony. This was a radical development. Multiple voices singing different melodies simultaneously represented a new conception of how individual parts could combine into a greater whole. Philosophically, it resonated with emerging scholastic ideas about unity and diversity, about how many could become one without losing their distinctiveness. The evolution of Christmas music during this period also reflected theological debates. The Nativity story itself raised profound philosophical questions that occupied medieval thinkers. How could the infinite God become finite? How could the eternal enter time? How could the divine nature and human nature coexist in one person? These paradoxes found musical expression. The slow, meditative quality of Christmas chants invited contemplation of these mysteries. The text painted vivid scenes of shepherds, angels, and a miraculous birth, while the music created a timeless space for believers to ponder what it all meant. By the late medieval period, Christmas had become one of the church calendar's most important festivals, and its musical repertoire had grown substantially. The Mass for Christmas Day featured specific chants that had been refined over centuries. Yet for all this development, Christmas music remained firmly within the church's walls. It was sacred music, set apart from the secular world, performed in Latin by trained clergy for solemn religious purposes. The philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas captured the era's view when he wrote that the praise of the lips is worthless unless it is accompanied by devotion of the heart. Music was acceptable only insofar as it served devotion, only when it remained subservient to worship. This principle governed Christmas music for nearly 1,000 years, but it was about to be challenged in ways the medieval church could never have anticipated. Chapter 2: Reformation and Revolution. Everything changed in 1517 when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg. The Protestant Reformation that followed transformed not just theology but the entire soundscape of Christianity. And nowhere was this more evident than in Christmas music. Luther's central insight was radical for its time. Faith should be accessible to everyone, not mediated through priests and institutions. This meant translating the Bible into vernacular languages so ordinary people could read it themselves. It meant allowing the people to take communion in both bread and wine, and crucially, it meant creating music that congregations could actually sing. Luther himself was a musician. He played the lute and studied music theory. He understood music's power to shape belief and emotion. Writing, "Next to the Word of God, music deserves the highest praise. She is a mistress and governess of those human emotions." But unlike the medieval church, which feared music's emotional power, Luther embraced it. He believed that stirring the heart through song could deepen faith rather than distract from it. This philosophy led to the creation of the chorale, hymns in German that used simple melodies drawn from folk songs and secular tunes. Luther took music that common people already knew, music they hummed while working or celebrating, and fitted it with sacred texts. "Away in a Manger," though written later, exemplified this approach. Its gentle lullaby melody was something a mother might naturally sing to her child, making the Christmas story intimate and accessible. The implications were revolutionary. For the first time, Christmas music became something ordinary people didn't just hear, but performed. The congregation was no longer an audience but a choir. This democratization of sacred music reflected a broader Protestant principle: the priesthood of all believers. If every Christian had direct access to God through faith, then every Christian could also participate in worship through song. Catholic authorities recognized the threat. The Council of Trent, convened in response to the Reformation, debated whether polyphonic music had become too complex and secular, whether it obscured the sacred texts rather than illuminating them. Some church leaders wanted to return to pure Gregorian chant, but the Catholic Church ultimately took a different path, commissioning composers like Giovanni Palestrina to create polyphonic works that balanced artistic sophistication with textual clarity. The result was some of the most sublime Christmas music ever written. Masses and motets that demonstrated how complexity and devotion could coexist. This era also saw the emergence of the Christmas carol as a distinct genre. Originally, carols were circle dances accompanied by singing, popular entertainments that had nothing to do with religion. But as Christmas became increasingly important in Protestant countries, these folk traditions were Christianized. The first Noel, God Rest the Merry Gentleman, and other carols we still sing today emerged from this fusion of sacred and secular, of church doctrine and village celebration. Philosophically, this represented a dramatic shift in how Christianity understood the relationship between the sacred and the everyday. Medieval theology had emphasized separation, the idea that holy things must be kept apart from the corruptions of worldly life. But Reformation theology, particularly in its Calvinist forms, developed the concept of common grace, the idea that all of life could glorify God. Work, family, and even entertainment weren't obstacles to faith, but potential expressions of it. Christmas music embodied this new worldview. When families gathered around the hearth to sing carols, they weren't just preserving religious tradition. They were enacting a philosophy that saw the domestic sphere as sacred, that elevated ordinary life as a site of spiritual meaning. The Protestant emphasis on literacy and education meant that printed carol collections became common. further spreading Christmas music beyond church walls into homes across Europe. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Christmas music had become a battleground for competing religious and philosophical visions. In Puritan England and New England, Christmas itself was banned. The Puritans saw it as a Catholic corruption, a pagan festival disguised with Christian trappings. They forbade Christmas celebrations, including music. In contrast, Lutheran Germany embraced Christmas with increasing enthusiasm, developing the Christmas oratorio tradition. Johann Sebastian Bach's Christmas oratorio, composed in 1734, represented the pinnacle of this approach. 6 cantatas that transformed the Nativity story into a profound meditation on divine love and human redemption. Bach's work illustrated how Christmas music had evolved philosophically. His compositions were intellectually sophisticated, using complex counterpoint and musical symbolism that required study to fully appreciate. Yet they were also emotionally direct, capable of moving listeners to tears. Bach believed that the aim and final end of all music should be none other than the glory of God and the refreshment of the soul. His Christmas music achieved both, creating works that satisfied the mind and stirred the heart. The Enlightenment brought new challenges. As rational skepticism questioned religious authority, Christmas itself came under scrutiny. Voltaire mocked Christian dogma, including the virgin birth. David Hume argued that miracles violated natural law and should be dismissed by reasonable people. In this intellectual climate, Christmas music faced an existential question. Could it survive if people stopped believing in the story it told? The answer, surprisingly, was yes. Because by this point, Christmas music had become intertwined with cultural identity and emotional memory. Even skeptics found themselves drawn to carols and hymns they'd learned as children. The music carried meaning beyond its literal content, connecting people to family, tradition, and a sense of communal belonging. This development anticipated a philosophical shift that would define modernity. The movement from metaphysics to meaning. From asking what is true to asking what is significant. Chapter 3: Commercialization and Nostalgia. The 19th century transformed Christmas from a primarily religious observance into a commercial and sentimental celebration. And music was central to this transformation. The Victorian era, particularly in England and America, created Christmas as we now know it, complete with decorated trees, gift-giving, and an ever-expanding repertoire of songs that had little to do with Christian theology and everything to do with emotion, memory, and increasingly, profit. Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, captured and catalyzed this shift. Dickens emphasized Christmas as a time for generosity, family, and social conscience rather than religious devotion. His story barely mentions Jesus or the Nativity. Instead, it focuses on redemption through human compassion, on the possibility of change, and the importance of community. The carols that Tiny Tim and the Cratchit family sing function not as worship, but as expressions of togetherness and hope. This secularization of Christmas opened the door for a new kind of Christmas music. Jingle Bells, written by James Lord Pierpont in 1857, had nothing to do with Christmas originally. It was a drinking song about sleigh races. But its association with winter and celebration made it a Christmas standard. The song exemplified a new category: winter songs that evoked the season's atmosphere without any religious content. The philosophy underlying this shift was complex. In one sense, it represented the triumph of sentimentality over theology, emotion over doctrine. The Victorian middle class valued feeling intensely. They wanted Christmas to be magical, to transport them away from industrial modernity's cold rationality into a world of warmth, generosity, and innocence. Christmas music became a tool for manufacturing this emotional experience. As the poet John Greenleaf Whittier wrote, "The best of a book is not the thought which it contains, but the thought which it suggests." Victorian Christmas songs weren't valuable for their theological content, but for the feelings and memories they evoked. Yet this sentimentality also reflected genuine philosophical concerns. The Industrial Revolution had disrupted traditional communities and ways of life. People flocked to cities, worked in factories, and lived among strangers. Christmas became a compensatory ritual, an annual reminder of values that modern life seemed to threaten: family, generosity, peace, and goodwill. The music reinforced these values, creating a sonic refuge from industrial capitalism's harsh realities even as it became increasingly commercialized. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw an explosion of new Christmas songs. O Holy Night, composed in 1847 with music by Adolphe Adam, demonstrated how the sacred and sentimental could merge. The song's climax, Fall on Your Knees, Oh, Hear the Angel Voices, retained clear religious content, but its lush romanticism and dramatic arc appealed to audiences as much for its emotional power as its theological message. The song's popularity also raised interesting questions. When performed in concert halls rather than churches, when appreciated for aesthetic rather than devotional reasons, was it still sacred music? Or had it become something else entirely? The answer perhaps was that these categories had begun to blur. The 20th century accelerated this process. Radio, recorded music, and eventually television brought Christmas music into every home with unprecedented frequency and variety. Bing Crosby's White Christmas, written by Irving Berlin and released in 1942, became the best-selling single of all time. Berlin was Jewish, Crosby was Catholic, but the song's appeal was universal. It spoke not of Christ's birth, but of memory and longing, of dreaming about an idealized past, symbolized by white Christmases. This was Christmas music as pure nostalgia. As the philosopher Svetlana Boym observed, nostalgia is a longing for a home that no longer exists or has never existed. White Christmas didn't depict any particular time or place, but an emotional landscape, a feeling of comfort and belonging that listeners projected onto their own memories and desires. The songs released during World War II gave it additional resonance. For soldiers far from home, it became an anthem of longing. For families on the home front, it expressed hope for their return. The commercialization of Christmas music reached new heights in the post-war era. Department stores and advertisers recognized that certain songs could trigger purchasing behavior. Christmas music became a tool for creating a buying mood, for transforming consumers into a state of nostalgic generosity that loosened their wallets. Studies would later confirm what retailers intuitively knew: the right Christmas music increased sales. This raised philosophical questions that we're still grappling with. When sacred music is used to sell products, has something been lost? Or is this simply another stage in Christmas music's evolution, proof of its adaptability and power? The German philosopher Theodor Adorno argued that the culture industry had debased art, turning everything into a commodity designed to manipulate. Christmas music, from this perspective, was a perfect example. Songs that once expressed genuine religious devotion or communal celebration had been reduced to background noise in shopping malls, their meaning evacuated, their purpose purely commercial. Yet others saw it differently. The fact that Christmas music could function in so many contexts, from church services to retail stores, demonstrated its extraordinary flexibility and enduring appeal. These songs had transcended their origins without entirely abandoning them. They operated on multiple levels simultaneously, as religious expression, as nostalgic trigger, as cultural glue binding diverse communities, and yes, as a commercial tool. This multiplicity reflected the complexity of modern life itself, where the sacred and secular, the authentic and commercial, constantly intertwined in a vibrant dance of life. By the mid-20th century, Christmas music had become a distinct industry. Artists released Christmas albums as reliable moneymakers. Radio stations switched to all Christmas programming in December. Songwriters understood that a successful Christmas song could generate income for decades. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, and countless others emerged from this commercialized context. Songs created not from religious inspiration, but from the desire to craft a hit. Yet even these overtly commercial creations often carried deeper resonances. Rudolph, originally a marketing tool for Montgomery Ward department stores, became a story about acceptance and the celebration of difference. Children who felt like outsiders identified with the misfit reindeer. The song transcended its commercial origins to become meaningful in ways its creators never intended. This illustrated something important about Christmas music. Its meaning is never entirely controlled by its creators or those who profit from it. Listeners make it their own, investing songs with personal significance that accumulates over years and generations. Chapter 4: Pop Transformation. The late 20th century witnessed Christmas music's final transformation, its complete absorption into popular culture. This didn't mean religious Christmas music disappeared. Traditional carols and hymns remained vital in churches and among believers, but the dominant Christmas music on radio, television, and eventually streaming platforms became indistinguishable from pop music more broadly. Distinguished mainly by lyrical references to snow, Santa Claus, and generically festive sentiments. This shift accelerated in the 1970s and 80s as rock and pop artists began recording Christmas albums. These weren't reverent renditions of ancient carols, but full-throated pop productions that happened to have Christmas themes. Phil Spector's A Christmas Gift for You, released in 1963, pioneered this approach with his signature wall of sound production applied to Christmas standards. The Ronettes, Darlene Love, and others belted out holiday songs with the same intensity and production values as their regular hits. The message was clear: Christmas music could be cool. It didn't have to be old-fashioned or corny. Young people could enjoy it without feeling like they were participating in their parents' or grandparents' traditions. This was Christmas music as a contemporary cultural product, renewed and refreshed for each generation. Wham's Last Christmas, released in 1984, perfectly captured this ethos. The song had nothing to do with Christmas thematically. It was a standard pop breakup song. But by setting it during the holiday season, and including sleigh bells in the arrangement, George Michael created a Christmas hit that appealed to pop audiences. The song's massive success demonstrated that Christmas music no longer needed any connection to the holidays, religious or even traditional secular meanings. Christmas had become simply a setting, an atmosphere, a marketing category. Paul McCartney's wonderful Christmas Time and Band-Aids, Do They Know? It's Christmas illustrated different aspects of this trend. McCartney's song was lightweight pop, catchy, but forgettable, distinguished only by its Christmas references. Band-Aid's Charity single used Christmas as an occasion for social conscience, urging listeners to remember Africa's famine victims during their celebrations. Neither song had any religious content, yet both became Christmas staples. Philosophically, this era represented the culmination of secularization. Christmas had been fully separated from its Christian origins in mainstream culture. This didn't happen through hostile rejection, but through gradual reinterpretation. Christmas became a winter festival, celebrating family, generosity, and togetherness, values that transcended any particular religious tradition. The music reflected and reinforced this transformation. Then came Mariah Carey. All I Want for Christmas Is You, released in 1994, became the defining Christmas song of the modern era. Written intentionally to sound like a 1960s girl group hit, it was pure pop confection, sophisticated in its production, and universal in its appeal. The lyrics were simple. All I want for Christmas is you. The sentiment was romantic, rather than religious, personal rather than communal. Yet the song captured something essential about how many people actually experienced Christmas as a time focused on personal relationships and private happiness. The song's extraordinary success, generating over $3 million annually in royalties for Carey and dominating charts every December, proved that there was still room for new Christmas classics. But it also confirmed that modern Christmas music would be pop music first, Christmas music second. The holiday had become an adjective, modifying pop rather than a distinct category with its own rules and traditions. This raised interesting questions about authenticity and tradition. Religious conservatives sometimes lamented this secularization, arguing that Christmas had lost its true meaning. But as the philosopher Charles Taylor observed, in a secular age, secularization doesn't mean religion disappears, but that it becomes one option among many. People can still celebrate Christmas religiously if they choose. But the dominant cultural expression had become secular, and the music reflected this. Meanwhile, a counter-trend emerged. Some artists deliberately returned to traditional carols and hymns, recording them with reverence and respect. These albums served a different market, people seeking authenticity and connection to Christmas music's deeper history. But even these traditionalist recordings often featured contemporary production and arrangements, demonstrating that you can't simply return to the past. Tradition is always being reinvented, always adapted to current contexts. The streaming era added another dimension. Algorithms analyze listening patterns and recommend similar songs, creating personalized Christmas playlists. This means that Christmas music, once a shared cultural experience where everyone heard the same songs, has become increasingly individualized. Your Christmas soundtrack might be entirely different from mine, reflecting our different ages, backgrounds, and tastes. This personalization represents both loss and gain, the erosion of common culture, but also the freedom to create meaning in your own way. Hip-hop and R&B artists have also claimed Christmas music, adding new textures and perspectives. Run DMC's Christmas in Hollis, Destiny's Child's 8 Days of Christmas, and countless others show how every musical genre eventually produces its Christmas variant. This diversity enriches the Christmas music landscape, but also fragments it. There's no longer a single Christmas sound, but many sounds, each appealing to different audiences. Contemporary Christmas music also reflects broader cultural debates. Some new songs emphasize inclusivity, acknowledging that not everyone celebrates Christmas or celebrates it the same way. Others push back against political correctness, insisting on explicitly religious content. Christmas music has become another arena where culture wars play out, where different visions of what America or the West should be get expressed and contested. Yet despite all these tensions and transformations, Christmas music endures. Its ability to evolve while maintaining connection to the past is remarkable. A child today might sing the same Silent Night that's been sung for over 2 centuries while also streaming the latest Christmas pop hit. This simultaneity, this layering of old and new, traditional and contemporary, sacred and secular, defines Christmas music in the 21st century. The philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer argued that tradition is not simply handed down unchanged, but constantly interpreted and renewed. Each generation receives tradition and makes it their own, adding new layers of meaning while maintaining connection to what came before. Christmas music exemplifies this process. We inherit songs from previous generations, but perform and understand them in our own way, fitting them into our own lives and contexts. and we create new songs that will become tradition for future generations. Conclusion. From Gregorian chants in medieval monasteries to Mariah Carey's pop anthem, Christmas music has undergone extraordinary transformations. We've journeyed through nearly 2,000 years, watching how music that began as exclusive liturgical practice became democratic congregational singing, then sentimental Victorian celebration, then commercial product, and finally contemporary pop culture phenomenon. What does this evolution tell us? Perhaps that Christmas music's power lies precisely in its flexibility, its ability to carry different meanings for different people in different times. The same carol can be profound religious expression for one person and nostalgic memory trigger for another. A pop song with minimal Christmas content can still capture something essential about the season's emotional landscape. This multiplicity is not weakness but strength. As we navigate our increasingly secular, diverse, and fragmented culture, Christmas music remains one of the few truly shared experiences. Whether we're religious or atheist, young or old, we recognize these songs. They connect us to our past, to each other, to something larger than ourselves, even if we disagree about what that something is. The evolution of Christmas music reminds us that tradition is always changing, that the sacred and secular have always been entangled, and that meaning is made not just in churches or concert halls, but in living rooms and shopping malls, wherever people gather and sing. Every time we hear a Christmas song, we're participating in a tradition that stretches back centuries and will continue long after we're gone. That's worth celebrating. If you enjoyed this exploration of Christmas music's fascinating history, please like this video and subscribe to Logic Over Spirit for more deep dives into the ideas that shape our world. What's your favorite Christmas song and why? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and whatever you celebrate, I hope this season brings you joy and meaning.